Hello, my name is Emma. I didn't think the sound of my own name could ever feel so distant. But that morning at Denver International Airport, it echoed over the loudspeaker like a warning cold. Clinical. And wrong. Emma Caldwell. Please report to Gate C, 42. Emma Caldwell. They said it twice. Slowly. Like I was a misplaced suitcase. I was sitting by the vending machines, clutching a boarding pass that wouldn't scan, not because it was invalid, but because it didn't exist. My son, Matt, had forgotten to book me a ticket. He had planned a lavish spring vacation to Kauai first-class tickets, ocean view villas, surf lessons for the twins, spa appointments for his wife, and not a single seat for me. Not even a standby. Not even coach. I stood at the gate in my clean slacks and soft yellow cardigan, the same one Matt once said reminded him of sunshine when he was 5, and listened as the gate agent blinked at her screen and said, "Mom, I'm sorry. There is no reservation under your name." I called Matt. The phone rang 5 times. Then voicemail. So I sat. I told myself it was a glitch. Maybe my name had been misspelled. Maybe they booked me under a nickname. Maybe someone would come running back, arms open, saying, "Oh my God, Mom." We forgot no one did. Through the glass, I watched their plane taxi down the runway smooth, certain, unapologetic, like it had a full cabin and no room for regret. I waited another hour, just in case. But deep down, I already knew. You don't forget someone like that unless, at some point, you've already decided they don't count. A little girl across from me cried when her balloon popped. Her father killed down, handed her his straw, and made her laugh in under a minute. That kind of care used to be mine. A long time ago, back when Matt would run to me after soccer practice with scraped knees and questions about stars. Back when I was the sun in his sky. Funny how quickly you can go from center to margin. When I finally stood up, my knees cracked not loudly, but enough to remind me that time passes even when love forgets. I walked slowly toward the escalators, past gift shops and neon signs selling dreams to people still young enough to believe them. Outside, the sun pressed gently through the glass. I didn't cry. I didn't call again. I just held my silence like a glass bird tight, careful pretending it hadn't already cracked. When I got home, the silence met me like a stranger. It wasn't the kind of silence that comforts you after a long day, no. This one had edges. It echoed through the hallways, curled into the corners of rooms, pressed down on the space like something was missing, or maybe like someone had been removed. I didn't call Matt. I didn't want to hear him say it was all a mix-up, that someone else was supposed to book the ticket, that these things happen because they don't. Not like that. Not when you've raised someone. Not when you were there for every spelling bee, every midnight fever, every heartbreak they thought would break the world. Instead, I fed the cat, boiled some water, made tea I didn't finish, then folded the laundry that had sat in the dryer for 2 days, a chore I'd left undone because I thought I'd be sipping guava juice on a lanai by now. Not folding terry cloth alone. That night, the doorbell rang. A padded yellow envelope had been left on the mat. No notch. No return address. Just my name printed in sharp black ink. Inside a $50 Safeway gift card. No handwriting. No, sorry. Just plastic and silence. It felt like someone had tossed a tissue at a wound that needed surgery. 2 days later, a package came airmailed from Honolulu. Inside was a t-shirt that said Aloha in faded red letters and a keychain shaped like a pineapple. It smelled like sunscreen and hotel soap. Not love. Not the kind of love that remembers to buy you a seat. And yet I wanted to believe it had been a mistake. That he forgot in a flurry of bookings. That I'd slipped through the cracks of a hectic life. But belief has a shelf life. And mine was starting to expire. I stepped out into the backyard. Pulled on my old gardening gloves, the ones with the thinning fingers, and tried to focus on the hydrangeas. They were browning too early. Maybe the soil was tired. Maybe I was... The weeds were thick along the edge. I pulled at them anyway. Even as my hands ached, there was a time I'd have laughed it off. But this time felt different. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was calculation. This was being trimmed quietly. Politely from someone's life, like a budget line, they hoped no one would notice missing. 3 days after the package arrived, I found a formal envelope slipped into my mailbox heavy cream cardstock. Embossed logo of the Future Roots Foundation. A foundation I had co-founded with my late husband Frank in the early years of our retirement. It was our shared dream to provide grants to underfunded schools in rural Colorado. Support teachers who felt forgotten. Just like I had once felt as a public school educator, inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting. No warmth. Just we're excited to share the results of our annual leadership review. The board has voted to pursue a new strategic direction, including updates to our bylaws and team structure. I read it again. And again. My name wasn't mentioned. Not as a co-founder. Not as a board member. Not even as an honorary advisor. Just gone. I opened the website. The Our Team page looked different, sleeker. More corporate. Gone were the photos of school children painting murals or the snapshots Frank and I had taken in the early years. Now it was Matt standing confidently beside 2 young consultants in blazers that looked more Silicon Valley than small-town service. I scrolled fast. Hoping, praying. Frank's name was still there, way at the bottom. Under In Loving Memory. Mine vanished. I clicked to access internal board files. My login failed. My email had been revoked. I wasn't just overlooked. I'd been erased. I sat in the study for a long time. Surrounded by books and binders we'd once used to draft proposals by hand. This house had been the nerve center of the foundation. Frank wrote the first mission statement on our dining room table. Using a yellow legal pad and a black pilot pen, I brewed the coffee while we debated the wording. Back then, Matt hadn't cared. He was too busy building his law firm in Seattle. But once the donations grew, so did his attention. I stared at the official letter, so crisp, so cold, and it hit me. This wasn't an accident. This had taken effort planning, meetings, legal filings. Matt had done it with a smile. He had rewritten the narrative without ever telling me. And the worst part, he knew I wouldn't fight. That I'd sit here, like always, folding the silence into something polite. But he forgot one thing. I still had the first draft. The next morning, before the sun had fully climbed over the ridge behind my house, I opened the old cedar chest tucked into the back of the hallway closet. It smelled of pine and dust and memory. Frank had built it the summer after he retired. Said every home needed a vault. Not for valuables, but for truth. Inside were the original documents. The Foundation's charter, our handwritten mission statement, notarized signatures, mine and Frank's, on every line that mattered. Receipts from our first fundraiser. A photograph of us standing outside a middle school in Pueblo with 3 smiling teachers holding oversized checks. I laid them all out on the kitchen table. The morning light hit the papers just right. golden and forgiving. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel erased. I felt anchored. Frank's handwriting was scrawled across a margin of the mission draft. Never let legacy be rewritten by convenience. He knew, somehow, he knew this day would come. I made copies of every page. One set went into a new blue folder, labeled in thick black marker, Original Foundation, Records Emma Caldwell. The other set I locked into the bottom drawer of my bedroom desk. Beside a power of attorney Frank had signed in 2009, a document I had nearly forgotten existed. By lunchtime, I had called Nancy Goldberg, Frank's old colleague from his years on the education board. She was retired now, living in Santa Fe, still sharp as ever. She picked up on the second ring, didn't ask many questions. Just listened. That's what real friends do. Wednesday? She had reviewed everything. Her voice on the phone was calm but firm. Emma, those amendments Matt filed, they don't override the original charter. You still have legal standing. They never removed you lawfully. He just created a parallel structure, but it's on shaky ground. I sat on the edge of my bed, the receiver pressed to my ear, heart thudding. He didn't just try to erase me emotionally. He tried to rewrite the law. But I had the paper, I had the ink, and I had time. That evening, I stood in the hallway, looking at the framed photos. Frank's retirement party, Matt's graduation, our first office in the guest bedroom. Then I noticed it, a space where one photo used to be, Matt's wedding photo. Gone? Not by accident. Someone had come into my house. The war hadn't started, but the flags were being planted. The next morning, I checked the small guest room, the one with the closet. I always kept locked. I opened the door slowly, not expecting anything but dust. But something was different. The dust was disturbed. Not enough to scream intrusion, but just enough to whisper that someone had been here. Maybe looking for something. Maybe trying to make sure I hadn't kept anything. I changed the locks that afternoon. No phone call. No confrontation. Just action. That night, I sat at the dining room table with a yellow legal pad and began writing. Not feelings. Not poetry. Facts. A full timeline from the day of the flight at Denver Airport to the moment I found the wedding photo missing. Names. Dates. File numbers. I included every document I had rediscovered. Every envelope. Every omission. Every echo of betrayal. Then I placed the packet in a sealed envelope and mailed it overnight to Nancy in Santa Fe. I wrote on the front in block letters, "For safekeeping." It wasn't a cry for help. It was a declaration. For the first time in weeks, I slept. Deeply. Without waking. Not out of peace, but out of purpose. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. The following Tuesday, Nancy connected me with a nonprofit attorney. She trusted Thomas Bell, a man in his early 40s with a reputation for handling messy founder disputes without turning them into public spectacles. Thomas flew out on a Thursday. We sat in my kitchen, surrounded by sunlight and old paper. He wore a navy blazer. No tie. Clean. Direct. Respectful. He listened as I walked him through the Foundation's original documents. The revised bylaws Matt had filed. The revoked logins. The erasure. When I finished, he closed the folder slowly, then looked me in the eye. Emma, you're still the legal co-founder. The amendments your son filed don't meet statutory requirements. You still have rights. Real ones. Strong ones. He outlined a path forward, a private filing to reestablish my legal role, a temporary injunction to prevent any further financial activity, and, if I wished, a plan to restructure the board on my terms. I asked one question: how long will it take? 3 weeks? Maybe 4. I signed the first 2 forms that afternoon. My hands didn't shake. Later, I stood by the window, the sun warming the hardwood floor beneath my feet. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I was finally ready for one. 2 days after signing the forms, an envelope arrived in the mail. Cream cardstock, gold trim, expensive. The kind of invitation meant to make you feel both honored and small. It was for the 20th anniversary gala of the Future Roots Foundation, held at the Four Seasons Hotel in Seattle. Matt's name was printed at the bottom in elegant script: Matthew Caldwell, Executive Director and Host. No personal note. No phone call. Just an invitation addressed to Emma Caldwell, as if I were any other donor. At first, I planned to ignore it. Why walk into a room that tried to erase me? Why sit quietly while my life's work was paraded under someone else's name? But then I thought about the missing photo, the disturbed closet, the silence, dressed in civility, and something in me shifted. I didn't want revenge. I wanted presence. So I chose a navy blue dress, the one I wore to Frank's final award ceremony before he passed. Not flashy, but dignified. I walked into the gala alone. No escort. No announcement. Just the quiet weight of my own name. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and curated elegance. Waiters floated with trays of champagne. Laughter floated in corners, like perfume. I checked the seating chart. My name wasn't on it. A handwritten note on the margin said table 17 near service exit. No centerpiece. No place card. Just a seat. Like a technicality? I took it anyway. Dinner was polite. The people at my table chatted around me. Not with me. Most didn't recognize me. A few glanced and looked away. Uncertain. Midway through the main course, the slideshow began. Photos flashed across the screen mat in boardrooms. Children holding certificates. Ribbon cuttings with sponsors. A single photo of me appeared, standing beside a mural we painted at a school in Durango. It lasted 2 seconds, then vanished. When Matt took the stage, he thanked donors, praised his team, announced a new education initiative. He never looked in my direction, never mentioned the founders, never said my name. I didn't expect him to, but what he didn't know was this. In my purse sat a printed copy of the foundation's original charter, signed by Frank, signed by me, filed legally, still binding. And at home, Nancy had already delivered all supporting documentation to Thomas Bell's office. The wheels were in motion. I didn't need applause. I didn't need the stage. I just needed to be in the room. And I was. It was a quiet Thursday morning. When Thomas called, his voice was calm, but there was a current running beneath it. "Emma," he said, "we found something else." The words landed like cold water. He explained that during the document review, one of their financial analysts had flagged irregular movement in 2 of my retirement accounts. Transfers that were masked as internal reallocations. No alerts. No red flags. Just gone. 就是零 moved over the course of 6 months into a holding company registered in Delaware under the name Caldwell Strategic Holdings, a name painfully similar to the nonprofit. The kicker Matt had been listed as the managing agent. I remembered the day he asked for the folders. I'd been sick, nothing serious. Just a low-grade fever. He came over with soup and a smile, offered to help sort a few things. He'd used words like optimize and simplify. I'd thanked him. I'd handed him everything. Thomas walked me through the recovery options: a financial freeze, civil action, restitution. He warned me gently but clearly that this wouldn't stay quiet. Not like the foundation filings. This would get messy. This would show up in legal records. Donors might see it. Matt's board, his staff, his family. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat down in the sunroom, stared at the rosemary bush outside the window, and asked myself one question. What kind of mother lets her silence become someone else's permission? That night, I lit a single lamp in the kitchen. I opened the recipe book I hadn't touched in months. Not to cook, just to feel something real. The pages still smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. The margins still bore notes from Frank: add more nutmeg. Too much clove. Perfect. In that moment, I remembered who I was, who I had always been, and who I wasn't anymore. The next morning, I signed the authorization. Thomas filed the injunction before noon. By 3 p.m., the bank confirmed that Matt's access had been restricted. The funds were frozen, pending investigation. I didn't answer Matt's call that evening. He let it ring 6 times. Instead, I poured myself a cup of tea. Then I stepped into the garden, pulled a few weeds, and whispered one word into the wind: enough. It was raining that morning, one of those soft Colorado drizzles that doesn't roar or rush. Joslingas, soaking everything in quiet. I took it as a sign. Some endings don't need thunder, just clarity. By noon, Thomas called with confirmation. The court had signed the injunction. The financial accounts tied to Matt's holding company were officially frozen. A full audit was underway. No dollar would move without a compliance officer's signature. 2 hours later, a new envelope arrived, ivory cardstock. Familiar font. The Future Roots Annual Fundraising Dinner. Downtown Denver Marriott. Matt was listed as host and keynote speaker. At the bottom, in a handwriting I knew, like my own, he had scribbled, "Hope to see you there." I didn't RSVP. But I went. I wore navy. Not black. No juveler. No makeup. Just presence. I walked in alone. The room buzzed with people in tailored suits and statement necklaces. The kind of crowd that smiles too wide when they don't remember your name. A few familiar faces gave polite nods. Others looked away. Like guilt might be contagious. They seated me at table 12, near the catering prep exit, far from the stage, far from the spotlight. I didn't mind. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to witness. Matt took the stage in a slate gray suit, polished as ever. He spoke of progress, impact, legacy. He used Frank's name, invoked my late husband like a credential. He even announced a scholarship in Frank's memory. He never said mine. Not once. As the applause faded, I stood and quietly stepped into a side room I had reserved 2 weeks earlier. Inside a table, a chair, a small flat screen showing a live feed from the ballroom. In my hand, a folder. Inside that folder were copies of the court injunction, the audit findings, and a revised board statement that removed Matt from financial control. I handed it to Ruth Livingston, a retired school principal, an early volunteer from the foundation's first year. She would deliver it to the board the next morning. I sat in that room for a while, watching Matt shake hands and pose for photos. He had the microphone, but I had the record. And that night, I didn't need to say a word, because sometimes reclaiming your voice means knowing when silence is the loudest truth in the room. 2 days later, Matt showed up at my front door. He didn't knock. He rang the bell 3 times in quick succession. Like urgency could erase the past, I waited until the last chime faded before opening it. He stood there in a wrinkled dress shirt, T-lotioned, jaw tight, like a man who hadn't slept but still wanted to look in control. I stepped aside. He walked in without asking, straight to the kitchen, like he still lived here. Like the past 20 years hadn't layered this house with tension and unspoken things. I poured myself tea. I didn't offer him any. He started with words that sounded like apologies, but they were wrapped in strategy phrases like miscommunication, oversight, and complicated timelines. He used the language of boardrooms, not living rooms, as if trust were a transaction, as if betrayal could be itemized and reversed. I let him talk. I listened with the kind of silence that unnerves people, the kind that makes them start tripping over their own excuses. Then, I placed a folder on the table. Inside the signed injunction, the financial audit summary, a newly notarized document removing him from all financial authority over my estate. The paperwork had already been filed. It wasn't a threat. It was done. He didn't open it, just stared at the seal like it might bite. And then the mask slipped. His tone sharpened. He said I was overreacting, that I didn't understand modern structures, that I had never been good with numbers. He said I was making it personal. I stood, walked to the hall closet, and returned with a single envelope. Inside was a final clause, drafted by Thomas installing a third-party fiduciary and placing my trust under court-supervised management. Matt wouldn't have access again without mutual consent, and I would never give it. He looked down at the envelope, then back at me. His shoulders slumped. He whispered one word, "Mom." But I wasn't Mom in that moment. I was the woman who paid every bill, signed every check, baked every birthday cake, and now, finally, drew the boundary no one thought I would. He left without another word. I stood at the door for a long while after it closed. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk, dancing like they didn't care where they landed. And for the first time in years, I let the breeze in. The week that followed felt like a quiet unraveling, slow, deliberate, almost gentle. No more late-night calls. No more thick envelopes in the mailbox. Just space. I met with Carla Monroe, the court-appointed fiduciary, twice that week. She was a woman in her mid-50s with steel gray eyes and the kind of posture that told you she'd seen everything and panicked at nothing. She didn't offer sympathy, only structure, and that's exactly what I needed. Together, we combed through every line of my estate, every outdated clause, every hidden vulnerability. By Friday, Matt's name had been legally erased from all financial control. The Future Root Scholarship, the one he'd tried to brand as a solo tribute to my late husband, was now governed by a newly formed board, with Ruth Levingston appointed as chair. Carla asked if I wanted to notify Matt. I said no. That night, I walked through the house, slowly, letting my fingers brush against the walls like I was introducing myself to them again. The bookshelf Matt helped me anchor 20 years ago. The pantry Frank built with his own hands. Every corner held fingerprints, some that healed, some that hurt. I pulled out a small wooden box from the hall closet. Inside were cards I'd written to Matt over the years. Birthday wishes, congratulations, Quiet encouragements. I'd saved them. Never mailed them. Always telling myself, when the time is right. But the time had passed. I burned them one by one in the fireplace. Not in anger. In release. The phone rang once that evening. His number. I let it ring. The next morning, Ruth brought coffee. We sat in the sunroom with the windows cracked open. Spring air weaving through the curtains. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. At noon, Carla sent a confirmation email. The restructuring was complete. Final. Filed. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I poured another cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the light stretch across the kitchen floor like it had been waiting for me. The house no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt like home. That afternoon, I drove to Denver International not to leave, but to pick up Ruth's granddaughter from a school trip. I waited at the arrivals gate, right where I'd once been forgotten. But this time, someone saw me first. She ran into my arms without hesitation. No ticket needed, just love that remembered where it belonged.